Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, RegisKillbin is the name and Hearthstone is the game, and this is my custom card review number 2. Last time around, I asked you guys to submit legendary spells. They didn't have to be Boomsday related, but they could. I got more than 450 different cards submitted, narrowed those down to my favorite 10, and I'm going to present those in this video and talk about why I thought they were such great designs. Now, before we get into that, we do have a few administrative things I want to talk about. First and foremost, there is another card review coming for custom cards, and you can find a link to submit your custom card in the description and in the comments below. And this time around, we do have another theme. I want you to design me a 1-mana card. So last time was legendary spells. This time, your card has to be 1 mana. So it can be either a minion or a spell, weapon, theoretically even a hero card if you'd like. I don't know how that's going to work, but it just has to be 1 mana. You'll have 1 week from the posting of this video to get those cards submitted. And as always, I'll be picking my 10 favorite from all the selections. And then at the end of the 4th custom card review, I'll pick my 10 favorite from the past 4 reviews. And those will be put up into a poll so you guys can vote on your overall favorite for the month, or at the very least for a 4-week period, for video period, even more specifically. And that person will win a $20 Blizzard gift card. So, all of that said, let's go ahead and jump into this week's custom cards because we have some pretty crazy stuff, really cool designs. And just a reminder, these are in no particular order, so let's go ahead and jump into the first one. So up first here, I have Escape Portal, a card from Gorta, and I just love everything about this card. This is a 6-mana legendary spell for Mage, and of course we have already seen the real legendary spell for Mage in Boomsday Project, but I think I like this one a little better. It reads, discover a portal card to another location and then put it on the top of your deck. So this instantly brings back memories of World of Warcraft for me, where the mages would always summon a portal and you would take that portal back to town, for instance, so you wouldn't have to use your Hearthstone. So it connects perfectly. The artwork here is fantastic as well. And I know you're curious about the portals. So here are the 6 portals that Gorta designed, and essentially they all have some sort of permanent effect that relates to the rest of the game. So you're spending 6 mana on your Escape Portal, you're sacrificing a draw in your deck because this now becomes the top card on your deck, and then you're spending even more mana to activate any one of these given portals. And again, the portal designs here are great from a fantasy standpoint because these are all cool different places in the World of Warcraft universe, and the artwork and images selected for each of them are very nostalgic for me. So all of that's wonderful. I'm not going to talk through every single effect here just because there's a lot and I don't want this video to be 8 hours long. But you'll note that some of these are probably more powerful than others. Most of them, though, do come with a pretty significant delay in their relevance. In other words, it takes a while for each of them to add up to a lot of value, and I think that's important for this card. It's got some built-in delays, because otherwise these effects are really, really strong, right? They're fantastic. And if they went into action too quickly, this card would be way too powerful. But because it's 6 mana that you have to spend on an empty turn, you got another dead draw and even more mana to spend here, that keeps everything in check so that it doesn't snowball too quickly or too powerfully. And I think all of these effects are cool because each one of them does something a little bit distinct and is good in certain kinds of matchups or environments, and it's going to give you a lot of powerful decision making when you have to pick which one. For instance, Portal to the Throne of Thunder is obviously way better against like token decks that kill a bunch of 1/1s. That would be fantastic, but you're not always going to get it. So it's a discover. That means you're only going to get 3 options of the 6 total, which sometimes you're going to whiff on this and not get the one that you need. So all in all, I like this one from its design angle. The fantasy of it's fantastic. It matches up with Hearthstone and World of Warcraft beautifully, but also the mechanics here are interesting and create a lot of gameplay decisions that would be rewarding and strategic, which of course Hearthstone needs more of. So I don't even know if this card would necessarily be powerful. And by the way, I'm not only ever going to include all just amazingly powerful cards in this list. I want cards that are complex and have strategy and have a lot of thought and creativity put into them. So I don't know if this is the most powerful card. It might just be way too slow, but it's exactly the kind of thing that's really fun and interesting and Hearthstone-esque in my mind. So that's why I like it a lot. So now let's talk about Recklessrifling. This is a warrior card designed by Meat and Explosions, and this borrows something I see a lot with custom Hearthstone cards where the artwork kind of escapes the frame for the art, and I think that's a cool little trick a lot of people pull off to bring a little extra life to Hearthstone cards. But this one's a 9-mana legendary spell for Warrior, and it reads, deal 3 damage to all minions wherever they are. And that's really cool. We've not seen anything like that, an AoE that affects minions even in your deck. And I love the implications of that and the design of this, because imagine this, for instance, against a zoo deck. If you get to turn 9 against a zoo deck, you can suddenly wipe out all of their little minions. And that sounds pretty cool because you've like destroyed 10 cards in their deck. And you think that's a really positive thing because you just AoE'd literally everything and you're super excited about it. But what you realize is as soon as that happens, what you've done is you've taken all the bad draws out of their deck, and now they only have bigger, scarier minions and perhaps just Doom Guards and Gul'dan and stuff that you probably don't want them to draw. So there's a little bit of downside built into this card, which is nice. It's obviously a really strong effect because, frankly, just dealing 3 to the board is good, right? It's a little bit of a Flame Strike or Hellfire, essentially, in its own right. But then it's got all this extra stuff. It can destroy cards in their hand. It can destroy all these extra minions in their deck. So you really limit their resources. It can even target things like Serenite Chain Gang, for instance, which is fantastic, and Life Drinkers, and all of these other things that you might want to get rid of, strategically speaking, not just because they're minions, but because they contribute to some larger game plan. That's fantastic. But then you've also damaged your own stuff a little bit, and because it says all minions, not just your opponent's minions. So if you hurt your taunt minions, you don't have as much of a defensive wall. You might have killed some of your small stuff outright. You just killed half your small little rush minions, for instance, or your Acolyte of Pains are now dead without actually achieving anything. So I just love the idea that you've got to figure out exactly how to build your deck to support this. And by the way, you might have minions that like being damaged when they enter the field. So like enraged style minions, Grom Hellscream would already be enraged the instant you played him. That's cool too. So just so many different things go into play in this card. The right time to play it, the right decks to play it against, how do you build your deck, and all of that feels wonderful. And it's a mechanic that we haven't really seen explored yet in Hearthstone. We've seen some deck manipulation stuff like this, but not in this direction. So it's a perfect idea for Warrior because it's this super ultra whirlwind effect. Great artwork, great name, probably a balanced cost, and frankly even a balanced card in some ways, although probably a little overpowered in others depending on the meta. So I think this is a great design, and I'm very curious what you guys have to say about this. If you think it's perhaps too overpowered or maybe even too detrimental to run. I think opinions could just run the gamut on this card. People could disagree. Maybe it's a 1-star card, maybe it's a 6-star card. I don't know, but that's part of the reason I like it so much. There's just so much to consider and think about that to me makes it a good design. So now let's talk about Harley's Huge Harvester from Imanon. This is a 4-mana legendary spell for Warlock. And we already have seen Warlock's legendary spell as well. I guess we saw Warriors too last time. I didn't talk about it. But once again, I think I actually like this better than the real deal. And that's because this card is really creative and the mechanic is again, kind of hard to figure out, but it does a neat, unique thing we haven't seen. And what that means is Harley's Huge Harvester destroys all minions in your deck. So only in your deck it destroys every minion. And then it adds a soul crate to your hand. And this soul crate says, shuffle all cards destroyed by Harley's Huge Harvester back into your deck. And that's really cool because what that means is you're kind of storing your minions up in this thing, or at least their souls, which, by the way, thematically, fantasy-wise speaking, is fantastic that Warlock is like stealing their souls and holding them captive for a little bit. And then eventually, whenever you decide the time is right, you can play your soul crate and put all the minions back into your deck. So you might be asking yourself, well, why on earth would you ever want to do that? Well, there's a couple interesting reasons. One is it helps you draw specific kinds of things. This is like the ultimate tutor card, where if you don't want to draw any minions, you don't have to. You can just draw spells. You could just draw a Death Knight, for instance. You might even run this in a zoo deck just to get Gul'dan and guarantee that that's the next card on the top of your deck because you don't run anything else. Alternatively, you could run burst damage. You could just put Soulfires and Hellfires in your deck alongside of a bunch of fast aggro minions, and make sure that you're top decking Soulfire into Soulfire with your life taps the following turn if you need to find 8 damage. So giving yourself that finesse to figure out how to build your deck and draw the cards you want specifically is really, really cool. And of course, it comes at essentially a 4-mana penalty, so there's a price to pay. You're sacrificing a fair bit of tempo in order to gain this potential advantage. And beyond that, not every deck's going to want to do this. Clearly, some would prefer drawing minions over spells. So it's not a deck, it's not like the perfect Warlock card by any means. It just gives you this interesting power and influence that otherwise wouldn't be possible. And then, of course, this was designed before Augmented Elic was revealed, but based on the wording of Soul Crate with the new card from Boomsday, Augmented Elic, you could actually shuffle twice as many minions back into your deck because you'd be shuffling those cards in. Augmented Elic would copy them, so you could basically double the size of your deck with Soul Crate. And again, Emanon didn't know that when this was submitted. What a pretty cool extra implication that gives this another layer of depth. So I just like this mechanic and this design. It's so fun for Warlock. It's strategically interesting as well. This one's pretty well done. So now let's talk about a new Warrior card from Pat Slayjack. As RegisKillbin, I cannot think of a better name than Pat Slayjack. I may have picked this card just for the name. I'm not sure. My bias might have gotten to me. I think it's a good card. I like it. But with a name like Pat Slayjack, how could you not give it some love? Whew. So this is My Life for My Shield, a new 5-mana spell for Warrior. And I like this design again because perhaps this is a theme, maybe too much of a theme, but I like when you have to make tough decisions in Hearthstone and you have to do things that potentially have a really big gain, but at some cost and at some risk. And this one removes the top 5 cards from your deck, but then you gain armor equal to their total cost. So, for instance, if you burned 5 10 drops with this card, then you would gain 50 armor for 5 mana. 50 armor is insane. Against an aggro deck, 50 armor will go forever. That's just so much extra life to work with, and that would be really good. But, you know, alternatively, if you burn a couple shield slams and a couple 3 drops or 4 drops, you might only get 10 or 15 armor, right? Like 5 mana for 15 armor is less exciting, particularly at the cost of 5 other cards that you might need. But of course, there's this real interaction here where this is probably a card that's best against aggressive decks and a card that really doesn't help you much in control environments. And that's really for 2 reasons. Number one, because in control, life just doesn't matter quite as much. The game usually resolves via like a big combo piece or just whoever runs out of value first, like you just outvalue each other. So life doesn't go as far. You need cards more than you need life. But against an aggro deck, you don't really need the bottom 5 cards in your deck. They're not relevant. You're not going to play a game long enough to go to 30 cards anyway. So sacrificing some cards for a lot of life gain is fantastic in an aggro deck. But on the other side of that, there's another layer of complexity. Because for this card to be good, you have to run a bunch of high-cost stuff. You have to run 7 drops, 8 drops, 9 drops, 10 drops. Really, I mean, 5 mana is probably where this starts to make a lot of sense. Like 25 armor for 5. That's like that Reno Jackson kind of territory, right? So you're running a pretty hefty, top-heavy style of deck, which means that's going to be naturally bad against aggro. So this gives you sort of a Reno Jackson style play against more aggressive decks, but sometimes it's going to be a dead card. Sometimes it's going to be a lifesaver. Sometimes it's going to backfire on you. There's a lot of RNG, a lot of checks and balances built into this thing, and that's why I like it. But I think I like the dream, you know, of getting 40 armor from a single card. That seems so insane, but it comes at great cost. And that's a neat mechanic for me. I don't think every Warrior deck would want to run this. I think some people would just be blatantly resistant to running this. But as a Reno Jackson Ultimate Lifesaver style card, I think this is a good, slightly healthier design in a lot of ways than Reno, because you still have to make some of those same sacrifices. It's not attached to a minion, and it's only a one-of as a legendary spell, remember. So it's not something you're going to be able to count on, much like Reno Jackson. And that's why I like this on top of Pat Slayjack's wonderful name. And then up next here we have Zarek's Multiplying Mixture from Squintin' the Slime. And obviously this is a reference back to our Boomsday project theme. And I gotta say, I just love how this card interacts with Priest and the idea of Zerek being this cloner. I think this captures that far better than the actual legendary spell we got for Priest, Zerek's Cloning Gallery, which is okay, but this makes it a permanent effect that is more interactive and makes your hero power more interesting and makes heal synergies way cooler too. So for 6 mana, for the rest of the game, anytime you restore health to a minion, mind you that is both enemy minions and friendly minions, which is important, then you summon a 1/1 copy of that minion. So this is actually like a few other priest cards we've seen in the past too, like Mirage Caller and even Herald Volage, which is cool because it brings back those effects but makes them more interesting, I would argue, and certainly more permanent, so that you get to actually utilize multiple instances of it instead of trying to make, you know, 1 or 2 big turns out of that. Suddenly it's this effect that lasts for the rest of the game, which is exciting. So, I mean, ideally you're going to be using this with things like death rattle effects. For instance, getting a big death rattle on a 1/1 makes that 1/1 really valuable. Like, the stats are less relevant. It's more about the effect. Frankly, just other effect cards like Radiant Elemental can do some exciting stuff as well. And I do want you to know that I recognize this is pretty scary in combination with things like Prophet Velen in particular. If you add in Vivid Nightmare and perhaps a Circle of Healing, you can make quite a few Prophet Velens right away. And there might be some very frightening combo potential following that path where you can get multiple Velens and, for instance, Mind Blast for tons of damage. But I think, based on my math real quickly, without comboing also a Radiant Elemental specifically, it's going to be hard to do all of that in a single turn, and that helps keep that in check a little bit from a combo standpoint. Certainly still possible with Eternal Servitudes or Spellstones, but that deck already kind of exists, and that combo potential is already there. This would only help it a little, and I think that's okay. Also, I'm not going to penalize Squint and the Slime here for Blizzard printing a card like Prophet Velen from the very beginning that is so scalable and that it doubles and it doubles and it doubles. That sort of multiplicative craziness probably doesn't belong in Hearthstone because it just gets out of control way too quickly when you're exponentially doubling things. So that's not Squinton's fault, and I think beyond that, this card just fits Priest, their current mechanic set, so well. It fits the theme of the expansion and the design. All of it bundles together perfectly. So I'm a really big fan of this card outside of some of those scary, extenuating circumstances that might be a problem. Everything else is absolutely perfect. I think the cost is right, because you do have to invest quite a bit of mana and time into getting this permanent effect. And even then, the upside is small and consistent. It's not some kind of crazy game-winning, instant win sort of scenario. So it feels fine to play against probably as well, all of which makes it a great card design in my mind. So now let's talk about a Druid spell from Big Rat King. This is a 5-mana legendary spell. It reads, silence an enemy minion, destroy it, and all other copies of it. So here we have this basically ultimate single target removal card in that it silences something, so things like death rattles don't matter. It destroys it, so it's an assassinate. And then beyond that, it actually destroys any other copy of that card. And right away, you're probably going to say, that is insanely overpowered for 5 mana. Compare this card to Assassinate. Assassinate's 5 mana. It doesn't silence and it doesn't extend to other copies. And I'd say, you're right, this is more powerful than Assassinate. But I think that's okay, because first off, this is a legendary spell. It's supposed to be strong. You can only run one of these in your deck. And for the record, Assassinate is not actually a card that ever gets played right now. So it probably needs to be a little better than Assassinate if it's going to get played. I think another problem, perhaps, and maybe even a bigger problem for this card, is that it's giving Druid a really good card and single target removal, something Druid has traditionally been rather weak at. But again, it's limited to only 1 copy. So don't judge this card on the fact that Druid is really strong right now, today. We're not considering all of these cards in only today's meta. We're considering their creativity and application across Hearthstone as a whole. So yes, we're going to talk about some good Druid cards. That's okay. Druid may not always be at the power level it's at today. So don't hold that against this card or Big Rat King for designing it. That's not really that relevant. But beyond that, there's actually another downside to this card, and that's particularly that if you're playing other Druids and you use this on a staple Druid minion, for instance, it's actually going to, based on the wording, destroy your copies of that card as well. So just for the sake of convenience, say you use this on an Ironwood Golem or a Hadronox. It's going to destroy your copy too. Not that you'd want to use it on a Hadronox probably, but you get the idea. And then taking it another step further, if you're using this against like a big general threat, like a Ysera or a Lich King, it would also destroy your Ysera or a Lich King. So even in other matchups, there might potentially be some downside to a card like this. And that's one of those small checks that helps keep this from feeling too ridiculously overpowered in my mind. I might still make this 6 mana for the record, but I think it's in an okay spot. It's not actually as overpowered as it seems at first glance. But then the real application of this card, and the reason it's so interesting, is to deal with things like Shudderwalk, for instance. If you can cast this on a Shudderwalk, not only are you destroying that 6/6 on board, or maybe the 3 6/6s on board, or the 3 7/7s on board, or whatever it is, but you're also going to destroy all the Shudderwalks in the opposing player's hand as well. So this is the kind of thing that can answer ridiculous, minion copying results. For instance, Pogo Hopper we've got coming in Boomsday could be great against that. I think even arguably it might work against Jade Golems, since they are all Jade Golems. If they got a giant board of Jade Golems, you might be able to wipe out all of them at once. Of course, they'd be able to resummon more with Jade Idol, because Jade Idol's not the same named card. But still, it could be a big swing on that sort of thing. So I think a lot of interesting ways to play this card. Pretty neat design, and we actually did see this a little bit in Arena, in the promotional Arena event previously, with the Warrior weapon. I don't remember the name of it. Maybe Fate Cleaver, that destroyed a minion and all copies of it. And that had some neat applications in Arena. This takes that, borrows it a little bit, adds a new spin on it as a legendary spell, and puts it into play in standard format, which I think it'd be a welcome addition. Maybe not right now, just because of Druid's power level, or maybe not even for Druid. It could almost go in any class. But at the end of the day, I think it's the kind of design that probably needs to exist in Hearthstone. So up next here, we have a new Hunter spell from Blue Zombie Blood, and I like this one because of its simple elegance. This is Bestial Augmentation, 4 mana legendary spell, and it reads, for the rest of the game, your beasts and mechs have both tribes. And that is a really cool unifying effect for the Boomsday project in particular, because as we've seen, Hunter is getting quite a few new mechs introduced. And of course, Hunter also uses a lot of beast synergy style cards. And fusing those together, I think, gives you this really cool opportunity to build a deck. And we've already seen in the past, Blizzard can do multiple tribes on a card with Nightmare Amalgam. And Nightmare Amalgam might be a perfect fit, by the way, for a mech/beast style deck. But I just love the idea that, giving your kill commands, for instance, activations on mechs is really cool. But more importantly, allowing your beasts to be magnetized. As soon as you can magnetize a beast, like, that opens up all kinds of cool opportunities. And because they'd be mechs, they would be magnetizable. So that's just really neat. Now, I will say that finding a deck that wants to do that and simultaneously spend 4 mana on only that effect might be challenging, because, for instance, an aggressive deck is not going to want to spend 4 mana to set this up. Your first few turns won't even have the option to utilize this, and of course you have to draw it at some point for it to work in the first place. So there are some difficulties, undoubtedly, in getting this thing to find success, but I like the idea of being able to take this and put it into almost a late game shell, thanks to something like Deathstalker Rexar. Because if you end up getting Deathstalker Rexar in play and you're generating all these zombies, what you can do now is kind of keep a backlog of mechs in your hand that have magnetize, and magnetize those to your zombies. Or at the very least, you can just go along with some more late game style beasts. And Bestial Augmentation just gives you extra options to mix everything together and create this cohesive game plan between what would otherwise be 2 completely separate things. And beyond that, the idea of augmenting your beasts with cool stuff is something we already saw with Augmented Elec, and this was submitted before Augmented Elec, my reveal card, was even revealed. So the naming there, pretty insane that ended up being a beast that was augmented. Pretty good stuff. But the artwork captures that perfectly. It's like, fusing all these mechanical parts into your beasts. So I think from a fantasy standpoint, it's wonderful. And from a gameplay standpoint, I think it adds this interesting wrinkle or layer to Hunter and creates this opportunity to make one cool new deck that fuses something of old with something new. And that would be great to see. We might actually still see this card. We don't know what Hunter's legendary spell is quite yet at the time of recording this, at least. I think we'll know very shortly after. So who knows how close this will be to reality, but a pretty neat idea that I think would be very welcome for me in the game. So now let's talk about Aura Mastery from Sword Master Lex. And this is another card I think just adapts something from World of Warcraft so perfectly into Hearthstone that's why I had to love it. So Aura Mastery is essentially an ability, spell, talent in World of Warcraft that allows you to switch between essentially different specializations that give you a kind of passive benefit. And that's exactly what Aura Mastery, the card here, does as well. You choose an aura that's represented by a dormant minion on your field, or token he calls it here, which is probably the right name. So like Sharazen the Corpse Flower that's inactive, or the Darkness, it's just that empty spot on the field, or Portal from Warlock Quest. And that just represents this aura that's going to last for the rest of the game. And here you can see the 4 different auras that Swordmaster laid out for this card, each of which, I'm not going to talk about them in detail again, you can read them, each of which does something really specific and often defensive, but sometimes offensive as well. So you essentially get 4 different options here to decide between, and which one you pick is going to have a huge impact on how the rest of the game goes. Some of them I think will be more obvious than others, like you're not going to pick an offensive option like Crusader Aura. It's tough to say. If you're in a really defensive game, you're not going to want that necessarily. You're probably going to want Devotion Aura. If you're looking to swing the game, you might go for Retribution Aura. If there's some specific card or thing or mechanic you're trying to play around, like a secret or a taunt, Concentration Aura makes sense. But it's not always going to be obvious which one's right. And a smart player might be able to make an unpredictable decision and say, look, I'm going to actually go for more damage and pressure here. I think I'm about to stabilize. I need to end this game quickly. So even when some people might pick Devotion Aura, a smarter player might pick Crusader Aura instead and win the game because of that. So those layers of decision making, that strategy is always something I'm going to like when smart plays and sound decisions and thoughtful forward-looking decisions are rewarded. That's what I like. Now, for a 4-mana spell, I will say this is pretty powerful. Maybe a little bit too powerful. We've had some other persistent game effects happening in these spells. They tend to land on that 6-7 mana spot. 4 mana is not much to pay for the strength of some of these, so I would probably bump up the mana cost a little bit or give it a turn limit or some other check here just to make sure that you're not getting something totally absurd for only 4 mana. So for instance, Retribution Aura is kind of like this permanent consecration you're getting for only 4 mana, and that seems really scary good. In some matchups, that would be awful, of course, but other times it would just win you the game outright for only 4 mana. So that's the one big downside here. I think the quality of the design, the artwork, the attention paid here overcomes that balancing side of it. And like I've said 1,000 times before, when it comes to custom cards, I'm thinking about this as an initial design, not a final design. In other words, this is more about getting the idea, the mechanic, the name, the artwork, all of that fused into a really cool package, and then a final design team would come along later to tweak the numbers here and there just to make sure it fits the balance of Hearthstone. I'm not gonna include anything that's like insanely, ridiculously overpowered, of course. Some might argue this is, but you know, if this were 6 mana, for instance, I think it'd be in a really healthy spot. Maybe even 5 mana would be fine. If also you only discovered 3 of these instead of all 4 every time, it might be fine, just to put a little check on it there. We have seen cards that choose 4 of, and this doesn't say discover specifically. So based on the wording, I think you'd see all 4. I wouldn't limit it to 3 or bump the mana cost up. One of those, just so you can't guaranteed get everything you want every time. But regardless, everything else about this is pretty much perfect. So I had to include Aura Mastery on this list. So now let's talk about another overpowered druid card that are going to trigger some people. This is Death Do Us Part, a 10 mana spell for druid. And I know I'm going to upset some people with this one, but I just really like the design because it harkens to druid mechanics that we already know and love so beautifully. And also the artwork and the name are fantastic beyond that. Like if you look at that artwork closely, you'll see that essentially a tree is kind of hugging or embracing a skeleton, which is just unbelievably cool when you look at the effect of this card, which reads, for each enemy minion, summon a random Death Rattle minion. So that's a spreading plague, essentially. If your opponent has 7 minions out, you spreading plague the board, and you get 7 random Death Rattle minions, and then you destroy everything. So it's basically a little bit like Poison Seeds. It's a little bit like Soul of the Forest. It's a little bit like Spreading Plague. It kind of combines all of this different stuff together. And it's very good. Let's be honest. This is a strong card. I know that. But I just love how beautifully it melds it with the artwork and the name and these druid mechanics. It just fits perfectly. That said, let's break this thing down in action, right? So most of the time your opponent's not going to have 7 minions on board when you play this. It's probably 3 or 4. And what that means is you're going to be summoning 3 or 4 random Death Rattle minions. And to be clear, most Death Rattles are positive. They're going to do something you want. They're going to leave behind a smaller minion or maybe a bigger minion sometimes. They're going to destroy stuff on your opponent's side of the board. Some of them do have very real downsides. Think Ticking Abomination, for instance, that could wipe your board. Some of them just won't do much at all. Some will generate you cards. I mean, there's a wide breadth of stuff that you get from Death Rattles, but most of the time you're going to win out. It's going to do something good, and you might even end up with a couple minions on the board, maybe an extra card in hand. Occasionally it'll backfire gloriously with multiple Ticking Abominations, etc. But most of the time you're going to be happy with the result. Beyond that, of course, you're also going to be clearing your opponent's board, which you're going to be happy with that result as well. So this is a Twisting Nether, essentially, with a little bit of potential upside, and that's what makes it so strong. But I'll be honest, I don't actually think this is too strong. First off, it's 2 additional mana compared to something like Twisting Nether, and the upside is unpredictable, inconsistent. It's not necessarily always even good, so a bit of a limit there. Beyond that, there's only 1 of these in your deck. You can only run 1 Death to a Spark because it's a legendary spell, unlike something like Twisting Nether or Doom or these other universal removals that we've seen in the past, Brawl even. And beyond that, even, your opponent's Death Rattle will still activate. This is not a silence, similar to Twisting Nether, of course. So it may not always even be perfect for the right kinds of boards. It can still leave them with some stuff as well. Just a great, solid AoE removal spell, wide board removal spell that will absolutely be a game-winning play some of the time, but other times might just be another piece of the puzzle. And of course, if this ever becomes a prominent part of the meta, it won't because it's not real, but in this theoretical world where it could, then people could just play around it too, right? Like you do with any other sort of AoE removal that we have nowadays, the Twisting Nethers and the Brawls of the world. So I like this card a lot, mostly from a fantasy and theme and artwork standpoint, but the mechanic just brings it together, and I just can't not love that. Is it too good? Maybe. Make that argument in the comments below. I want to hear your thoughts. But Ezreal, as far as I'm concerned, you got this one right. I think it's great, and I'd frankly like to see it in the game. So here for my final card, I have Send 'em Flying from Void Volume. This is another warrior legendary spell. And you guys knew if I was going to do any kind of card review, I was going to have to get something in there that dealt with combo disruption or hand disruption. And that's exactly what this one does. So Send 'em Flying essentially here is about moving something from your opponent's hand to your opponent's deck. And it does that via a double discover mechanic. So first you discover a card that's in your opponent's hand currently. There will be 3 choices. They might have 10 cards. You get to see 3 of them. Then you pick that one, and then you next get to pick something that's in their deck. And of course, they might have 20 cards in their deck. You're only going to see 3 of that 20, and you got to pick which card you think is going to be the least useful for them, and then move that into their hand. So the dream situation here, of course, is taking their Shudderwalk, for instance, from their hand and trading it with some random garbage in their deck, like an Earthshock or a Wild Pyromancer or whatever thing they don't need to satisfy their combo, therefore hoping to put their Shudderwalk deeper into their deck. But of course, this is an incredibly inconsistent play. Half the time it's not going to do anything because the Discover cards you see in hand and the Discover cards you see in deck aren't going to match up. So only, maybe 1 out of 10 times is this really going to be that heavy-hitting thing. And even then, it doesn't ruin your opponent's game plan. It merely stalls it. It slows it down. But that's the right kind of disruption. Cards like Death Grip, which allow you to steal your opponent's Hadronox, that's super fun when it happens, but that's probably not how disruption should work. I think it should be more about stalling, frustrating, making it difficult, not making their game plan impossible. So Send 'em Flying finds that perfect balance here, where it slows them down, it stalls it out, but it doesn't break it. And beyond that, I think perhaps a more important aspect for Send 'em Flying, or at least a more consistent aspect for this card, is that it gives you a lot of informational resources as well. You essentially get to see 3 cards that are in their hand, which means you have 3 extra pieces of information to play around now. You know they have AoE removal, you know they have 1 big threat and some other garbage. And then you get to see 3 cards in their deck. So you can say, oh, whoa, their combo piece is still in their deck. I have a little while. Or, oh, that AoE card's in their deck. They've already used 1, so I don't have to play around that as much right now. And that informational asset is pretty valuable too. It's a one-time thing, unlike something like Chameleos, for instance, but could still help you make really important decisions. So it's never a totally dead card, because, you know, in a non-combo deck or in an aggro deck, this might be hard to use for its swap effect. But that informational side of it, the reconnaissance, the spying, is still relevant. Even if you have an aggro matchup, as long as you have 2 spare mana, it might be fine. Like, does he have that Sunkeeper Tarim in hand, right? Or does he have that level up? I don't know. Let's take a look and see if we can find out. Now, it's not going to be 100% reliable, because you may not see the level up. They may have it hiding somewhere else, but you'll learn a little something. You'll get more information than you had previously. And if you're smart about using that informational resource, that can go a long way. And then, of course, the disruption's cool too. So I like that this is a low-cost card. It's very hard to design good low-cost legendary spells. I experienced that myself when trying to make some. But I think this does it beautifully. Something you can just flex into turns. It's a disruptive combo beater for a control warrior deck, which sometimes just can't beat combo or can't be fast enough. This could help you do that. So in my mind, great design by Void Volume here. Exactly the sort of thing Warrior would do. I'm not sure it feels super legendary, but the name and the artwork are fantastic and even match up with the Boomsday Project a little bit too. So I think it makes the cut as far as a legendary card is concerned, and that's why I included it on this list. And there you go, guys. That wraps it up. My top 10 cards for the custom card review number 2. Just a reminder, there were 450 plus cards submitted. If I didn't pick yours, don't take offense. I'm not saying it's bad. I actually narrowed the list down to 50 plus cards I thought would have been fine in a video, and it was unbelievably difficult to refine that even further to the final 10. I left a lot of good cards off of this list. And you might think, man, my card was way better than that. And you know what? To a lot of people's opinion, you might be right. Of course, I'm going to be susceptible to my own personal choices and biases here. Things that look interesting to me, things that resonate with me, things I subconsciously wish were in the game. That's what I'm going to pick. I can't help that. That's just how it is. I'm trying to be as objective as possible. But don't take offense. Don't take it personally. Don't take it to heart if your card didn't make the cut. Try again next time. Maybe I'll get you next time. Also, on top of that, please pay attention when you're submitting cards, guys. Because there were so many cards, things like typos and low-res artwork, submitting minions in a legendary spell competition, all of that kind of stuff is going to make it really hard for me to pick your card when there are so many good options. And then on top of that, please consider the complexity of your card text. It's okay for designs to be complex. We saw a few of those with Escape Portal and Aura Mastery today. Like, they were multi-part cards that had a lot of complex elements in them, but they were done so in a nested fashion, where each given card only had so much card text, and it was broken down and easily understood on a per card basis. A lot of people submitted legendary spells with like 4 different mechanics and a single block of text on the card. That's just not something we ever see in Hearthstone. Anytime there's that much complexity, it has to be a chain of events or nested, like I talked about before, where one thing opens up multiple options. So be mindful of that. If your card starts to look like a novel, there's a pretty good chance it's not going to fit my vision for what a Hearthstone card should be, because that doesn't really reflect how Blizzard designs cards either. It's usually 1 or 2 very brief sentences max, or again, multi-card elements fused into one, which you're allowed to do, as you saw here. You can do that. Just be careful. So all that said, another reminder in case you missed it at the beginning of the video, next time I'm looking for 1 mana cards, be they spells or minions, that's fine. There are links to submit those below. Please share your thoughts and comments on all these cards in the comments below. If you think something's crazy overpowered, if you think it's terrible, if you don't think it deserves to be on the list, I want to hear all of that. If you thought a card was awesome, share that too, because people want to know that their cards were loved and respected. So please take some time to share your thoughts. But until then, thank you so very much for watching. And until next time, game on.